should be connecting here in just a moment. Boy, Dada is very active today. Anything could happen. But again, we try to keep him passive, and Crazy Rabbits is trying to keep him under control. But, you know, sometimes cats get excited. Animals get excited, right? They're active. They want to be petted. Who knows? But I got him everything he could possibly want. Toured him around the house, did his little routine walk. You know, he has little areas he likes to rub against and stuff. Dada is very regimented. You want to break the regiment with Dada. Let's see where they are. He's over there. There's Crazy Rabbit. They're kind of right there. Either way, sorry I'm just a few minutes late tonight, everybody, but I thank you for joining me. I got too busy on the weekend yesterday. We were going to do this show Sunday night, but sometimes things take longer than I think they might, and right now I have a lot going on, so thank you for your patience while we reset and do our part 1.3 tonight of Athanasius against the Gentiles or heathen. We're actually going to do 4 parts to finish this book off. I had said 3 parts in the prior 2 shows because initially I did have it divided into 3, about 15 sections each. But then after the first show, I had a sore throat after the first show. So I had to talk very kind of slow, and it sounded a little deep. I mean, it's getting back to normal now, but so I could only get through the first 10 sections. And then the second show was a little similar, although I was much better. So we did the next 10 sections. So we're going to do another probably 11 sections tonight, 11 or 12, and then we'll finish it up next weekend, or maybe another weekday, right, within the next week or so, because I want to finish up this book of Athanasius against the Gentiles, heathen, and then we'll take a little break from his stuff, right? We can only take so much false doctrine, right? And so everything he writes is terrible or false, but we know what's coming, and a lot of what he's already written is not correct in many respects. So nevertheless, you know, we want to appreciate people for things that they do that reflect good thinking or Christian values, or just in general an awareness that is nice to see put in words. So I think you'll see tonight, you know, we get into some stuff regarding the soul and intelligence or rationality. At the end, we're going to get a little more where we left off on 1.2 with the idols and honoring the carver or the artificer more than the product, and his arguments against the Greeks in that respect. And, you know, as we've discussed, there are a lot of assumptions that he's making. I pointed many out in part 2, 1.2, and also in part 1.1. Although 1.1, there were just several blatant false statements about the Bible that it overshadowed, you know, his other stuff, his assumptions, that while he may have had some point in his argument, nonetheless, I don't think were as significant as he concluded, because he didn't establish, for example, that the gods, or that gods couldn't be licentious or display immoral behavior. Excuse me. Which is not true, right? Because not biblically, excuse me, we have the examples of Satan and the demons, who in the, pre-flood time especially with the demons, but even after that, right, and the possession of humans and the different things they would do, and then the devil himself, of course, the father of the lie. You know, biblically, there are sons of God who are gods, who do the very things or similar things, right? Taking all the women and different sensual behavior, as Athanasius might describe it. And then we have the way that the Bible presents God himself, right? And of course, Jesus. We haven't gotten much into that yet in his early writing, and I told everybody that would be the case. He's mentioned their relationship a couple times, right? And he does so again tonight a few times. For the most part, though, he identifies the God of the Bible, the true God, as the Father. Now, he also couples that with the Word. We saw that in part 1.1. And maybe also in part 1.2, but for sure part 1.1, he coupled together God and the Word, God the Father and the Word, with respect to the natural revelation of things that he considered divine, with regard to how he saw the sun and light, and ways that he could describe things and justify them based on what exists, while at the same time denying that the ways that the Greeks would view things that exist, whether they be idols, or as you're going to see tonight, different things in nature, right, in creation, or even in the universe. He completely rejects what he presents as the Greeks' view of those things as gods. But I don't believe he's really established, or at least not completely addressed, the ways. He addresses a number of different arguments that the Greeks might make, but I'm not quite seeing the argument put in the way I think would best represent how they see the gods of the idols representing or being the gods that they worship. I think there's a way that the Greeks could explain it that he hasn't addressed directly, but we're not really here to defend the Greeks, right? We as Bible believers understand that in the Bible there are demons, as we mentioned. There are sons of God who have rebelled against God, including Satan, who have either been appointed by God over parts of the earth or nations. Satan himself told Jesus, and he didn't deny it, he had authority over all the kingdoms. He's called the God of this world. He regularly engages the angel of Jehovah in the Old Testament, is presented as engaging Michael by name, according to Jude. Obviously, he has significant authority. He was given incredible authority and power to deal with Job, right? To take life, to create weather events, to devastate material possessions and lands. So when we talk about the Bible, right, we need to understand what it actually teaches. And then when we read people like Athanasius who start to tell us things about what he believes real gods or non-gods would be like, if that's not what the Bible says or teaches explicitly, then we reject it, right? So even though we're not getting into the things we most often do with Athanasius, like the Trinity yet, you can see already, and this is why this is important, everybody. This is why it's important that we spend this time just to go through it and get it done, right? So we all can say, we probably know your heretical hero better than you, and you can watch our review, and we have some questions for you, right? Because we see Athanasius regularly presenting his ideas as facts. When he hasn't established that they're facts, whether they be with respect to what would be or would not be a god in his argument with the Greeks, or where it concerns the kinds of behavior, right, that they would display. So when we see him saying gods wouldn't be a certain way, and we see that in the Bible, gods are a certain way, right? So we don't just have gods who, right, even when we consider the gods pre-flood that descended according to the Bible, like Poseidon, even though they took daughters of men, they were still very powerful, right? If Poseidon is the one who carved Atlantis, for example, the eye of the Sahara, right? The Refute structure, or whatever they built, all the different structures we see throughout the earth that were pre-flood, that looked like they were built by bigger humans or sons of God, and are consistent with what the Bible teaches, right? We see Athanasius already saying the Bible teaches things it doesn't about the Garden of Eden, other Genesis accounts, and Adam and Eve and the Satan serpent accounts. So he's shown he's not reliable when it comes to interpreting the Bible. He will make radical statements about what it says that it doesn't say. And then he will put forth ideas that aren't supported by it, like the type of behavior gods would display. So, or even where it concerns whether there are real gods behind some of the idols. Right? We can understand that the idols are not gods, and he argues persuasively to show that. But in the Bible, the demons regularly are associated with idols. The sons of God are appointed over the nations, according to Deuteronomy 32:8 in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Masoretic text, like you'll see if you read NWT, says sons of Israel. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, consistent with the Septuagint, it says sons of God or angels, which is consistent with what we see in Daniel with the princes of Greece and Persia and Michael over Israel, right? Satan himself is the god of this world, right? We see the nations engaging with each other all the time in ways that represent, according to the Bible, this demonic sons of God influence, in contrast with Michael or Jesus. So that doesn't mean you have to believe Jesus is Michael, okay? But nonetheless, they are contrasted. That's obvious and a fact. So this is how the Bible presents gods. And I wanted to just kind of give that brief summary. There are many videos we've done on it. I've written about it. You can read it for yourself. Just read these texts in the Bible that I discuss. And you will see very clearly that Satan, the other sons of God, they're all presented in this real living way, whether in association with idols or not. And I don't believe Athanasius believes that's the case. So either way, a lot of what he says is correct and we agree with, right? We don't believe that the idols are themselves gods. So if the Greeks truly believed that, the ones he's referring to, that the idol itself is the god, then we would deny that's actually biblical. The Bible very clearly says idols are not alive, not gods. They're just the carving of man's hands, like we're talking about with Athanasius. But that does not mean that the sons of God are not real. There's a big difference, right? The Bible never says that. The Bible never denies the existence of the very beings it says do exist repeatedly. Even in 1 Corinthians 8:4-6. One God the Father. Even though there are so-called gods and lords, it just as there are many gods. That doesn't mean they're all really existing gods like Satan and the demon sons of God, but many of them are. So to deny that, whether you're Athanasius or another Trinitarian, is unscriptural. So I think a lot of what Athanasius says, if the Greeks knew the Bible, right, they could say, well, wait a minute. Your own texts agree that, see, so Athanasius is really denying a lot of what the Bible says is true, like about Greece, right? What does Daniel talk about? Michael battling with the princes, the gods of Greece and Persia. He's not fighting with a human prince. He's the prince of Israel. Michael fighting a human prince? I don't think so. think that would be pretty easy, right? There would have to be another power or force there for that to even be a contest. And of course, we see, as in the book of Zechariah and elsewhere, Satan himself engaging with the angel of Jehovah over Joshua the high priest, whether to crown him, whether to make him that, in spite of his condition, his sinfulness. And then you have Michael over the body of Satan, of Moses with Satan. Right, so this is happening, everybody. This is the Bible. But for some reason, these accounts, just like with Trinitarians today, right? They don't really accept any of that. Yeah, they see Michael and Daniel. Yeah, they see Prince of God. But they're never talking about it like this, right? Never talking about how the sons of God are appointed over the nations as gods and operate through and with these idols, even if they're not gods. And so when the Greeks, it's not like the Greeks don't have a real spirit there, right? A real God there. There definitely is. That's who Michael was fighting. I doubt there was just one, but I don't know metaphysically how they aggregate or work together, right? So I'm not going to speak ahead of myself, but you see what I'm saying? So when we read, as we're going to right now, Athanasius, part 1.3 of his Contra Gentiles, what I'm calling part 1.3, we're going to do 4 parts, part 4 within the next week. And we'll wrap it up, take a few weeks off, and then come back and read Athanasius' work on the incarnation of the Word, where there will be a lot more stuff about issues we deal with more frequently. But this is important, right? It's important for us to understand his thinking fundamentally before we get into all the Trinitarian stuff. And his work here with the Greeks helps us do that. It helps us understand how he's seen spiritual things and other gods and other nations, right? And we can compare that with the Bible, just like we do with what he writes on the Trinity. It's not just the Trinity that he's wrong on. It's part of a package of problems that inform a lot of this false doctrine over what? Like 1,500 plus years. This is stuff we have to unwind carefully and go through so you understand. We all can see. And you don't need anything but now what we can read and see, okay, this is what happened here, this is who this guy was, and this is why he's thinking all these things. That's why Sam's going nuts, right? And I think that sounds a little bit better. Hey, Miro, let me know if you think it's better. I think I did make another adjustment, and I'm telling you, when it gets off, it's nuts. But I think I got it better. So in any case, let's get to it, all right? Let me say hi to everyone, and then we'll get going. And by the way, again, I highly recommend, I have no affiliation, Coaqua. This is a great coconut hydration drink. Oh, yeah. There's Dada. Do you see Dada? You can only see part of Dada. Him right there. Right there. Hello, Dada. Come on. Come on, Dada. We'll see. I don't know. Dada. He's just sitting there, like, staring. He's a good boy. Good boy, Dada. Good boy. Good to see you, Betsy, TKS, Everett, Commodore Bankhead. Hello to you. Is Miro found out about your voice? Yeah. Well, I think I had a voice and a mic issue. My voice is getting a lot better. And I think I got the mic better too. Either way, we're going to keep going. I can always redo this stuff. I would hate to have to do that. But, so what? I mean, we'll just do the best we can, and then we'll decide if the quality is not good enough, then, well, we'll do it again. Flynn is fighting a wasp. We hope you win that battle, Flynn. Don't get stung though, right? They're not. It's a good thing wasps aren't bigger, right? If wasps were like even the size of a bird, we would have a problem. And so it's good to see you all here. Looks like you have any. Yeah. No, he took off. He's out there. So let's get going, everyone. I'm going to bring it up for you. Go ahead and bring up the series here. And then I have at least one upload coming in the next few days. I get really busy, especially right now, but I should have it ready. It's on, it's more comments review. Unbelievable stuff. And deletions, right? Just craziness. The stuff that people are saying or come up with. Unbelievable. Feel sorry for them. You know, I know we all have to go through a learning period, and it's okay, and I don't hold it against anybody, but they're learning this somewhere. Some of the stuff that we're hearing is like, who's teaching you this? What's going on here? Really weird grammatical stuff and just inability to understand discussions and really wasted time stuff, but nonetheless, it's kind of useful for like a comments review, because then you can see like who's nuts, right? And when I say that, you understand, okay, there are some people where we don't like to call people anything. I would prefer to just be a normal person all the time, right? Who wouldn't want that? I think that would be great. But not everybody complies, right? Not everybody agrees. Let's go to the little shared screen mode right there. I think it's the best way to do that. I want to make sure I get this all captured in there. Probably right there. I don't lose my face. So you'll just have to believe me on that little first part. Right, we're reading from the Nicene, Post-Nicene Fathers series, the online version. I've shown you the volume before. Got it sitting over here. It's over there. I'll leave it there for now. You've seen it. I showed it in part 1. Very readily available. I think I put the link below. If I didn't, I will check and try to put it. I'm just a little behind, so I apologize. But you can see it right here. It's at ccel.org. And you can just do a search for Athanasius' works. You should have no problem finding it, but again, I will put the link if I haven't already below. We left off after reading section 20, right? And so we're talking a lot about these idols, and Athanasius is writing against the Greeks' view of all these gods and the use of the idol, and he's making some good points about how they seem to value the idol, the working of someone else's hands or design, more than the one who designed it. And he's like, why is that? Why are you doing that? If the idol is so important, if it's a god, well, then what is the one who made it? Right? And in one sense, it's a good argument. In another sense, again, I think you could argue for the Greeks that the designer or the artificer of the idol is only able to do that because of what ability has been given to him or her by the god. So the god is once again superior to the designer or artificer or carver, and the idol represents the god. Therefore, they worship the idol and not the artificer or carver, because it represents the god. If they actually believe it is the god, then of course that's much more open to attack by what Athanasius is saying. But if not, then it's not as open to attack. And Athanasius would have to argue further for his position. Either way, we believe that biblically, as I mentioned in the opening, the Bible shows that sons of God are real, whether it's Satan or demons who are like him, who rebel against God, and they actually have authority over nations of the earth from God, or that now the Son of God, right, the ruler of the kings of the earth, Revelation 1, 4, and 5. So he has all authority and power now, but it's the same. It's the same things that his God and Father would do, the Son is doing. He's not doing a whole different, no different. Not according to the Bible. That's why he's given the authority, right? He's actually God to us, sitting on the Father's throne, doing only the Father's will, not his own. And so, when it comes to idols, the only one, now the Bible, of course, in the Old Testament does present God as directing the carving or making of certain images, or the copper serpent, right? But this is God, as I talk about my Bible and the idols, part 1. That's God directing these things to be done. And they do, in fact, represent other things, right? In fact, many times the cherubs represent real cherubs. The copper serpent represents Jesus, who was lifted up. The Bible associates spirits with serpents or serpent-like figures, right? The seraphim are fiery, flying serpents. The angels are often depicted around, above and above God's shoulders, or around his upper body, metaphysically, and below his feet, and able to move around, and even flying, right? Like having wings, cherubs. So the representations we are given are accurate. But so to what extent in non-Jewish, non-Christian literature or activity the nation's gods are represented by their idols similarly? We can't say, can we? Because we're not those people. We haven't been given the commands and the ways that we could verify, like we look to in the Bible, to say, okay, yeah, the prince of Persia directed that these carvings be made, right? That these statues be built. Maybe they did. We can see again how God and the Son of God are involved in ways that they direct and were fulfilled. It doesn't give us license to go making a bunch of other things and calling them gods, or claiming that they represent God or things in the Bible. But what we do have in the Bible at least reveals to us things about God and the sons of God that could be also true of the Greeks or the Persians or the Babylonians or any nation that God has given authority to one of the sons of God. So when Athanasius argues in these ways, as we're going to see continued tonight, I just don't believe he has fully evaluated things in ways in his arguments, for sure not. Now, overall, I don't get the feeling he believes any of what I just said, or at least not most of it. But let's go ahead and take a look as he describes further reasons why the idols not only aren't representations of real gods or real gods, but not even appropriate images of angels, or what would be considered lower type beings. So let's see what he has to say. Again, we're not going to get into a ton of Trinity tonight. It's coming up, and we need to read this because it's important we understand the broad perspective that Athanasius brings into his writings against the Arians, and just his presentation of his views. Section 21. The idea of communications through angels involves yet wilder inconsistency. This is the little header at the top. Nor does it, even if true, justify the worship of the image. But as to their second, and as they say, profounder defense, one might reasonably add as follows. If these things are made by you, ye Greeks, not for the sake of a self-manifestation of God himself, but for the sake of a presence there of angels, why do you rank the images by which ye invoke the powers as superior and above the powers invoked? For ye carve the figures for the sake of the apprehension of God, as ye say, but invest the actual images with the honor and title of God, thus placing yourselves in a profane position. This is very important right here, right? Because this is what he's saying they're doing, right? And if we're going to try to make a connection in any way with what other Christians in and around this time and certainly later began to do, we want to make sure we fairly make a comparison, because he's revealing a lot in this letter to against the Gentiles or heathen. But I don't find a lot of it consistent with what he later writes against Arius or various theological works of his. So he says they invest the actual images with the honor and title of God. Right, now this title of God, you could argue, if you were like trying to say that Athanasius is not even consistent with Catholics today, who often refer to him in terms of their idols. They would say, well, we don't call our idols God. Mary, we don't refer to the statue of Mary as God. Okay, but you do call her the Mother of God. That's almost higher. So that, and you have here with the honor. Okay, so how are they doing that? Well, certainly by calling it God or a God, but prayer, praying to the image, using it in their worship as they regularly did, offering to it. The very things that Catholics do to Mary, right? They pray to her and to others, but they pray and offer to Mary. Again, reading this and knowing what we know about Catholics and various groups, Eastern Orthodox or even many Protestant groups today, and their use of idols, it's just so strange, right? When we know how frequently they love to go back to Athanasius and the Nicene period where the Nicene Creed was being put together, and to hear this kind of stuff as well. Right? It's like, okay, well, wait a minute. Let's try to be consistent here. We have a lot of profanity today in the churches. Idols, verse 2, section 21. For while confessing that the power of God transcends the littleness of the images, and for that reason not venturing to invoke God through them, but only the lesser powers, right? He's arguing against them being like intermediaries or angels. Ye yourselves leap over these latter, and have bestowed on stocks and stones the title of him whose presence ye feared, and call them gods instead of stones and men's workmanship, and worship them? For even supposing them to serve you, as ye falsely say, as letters for the contemplation of God, it is not right to give the signs greater honor than that which they signify. Now, this argument here, right? When you say, if we were to say this to Trinitarians, it says right here in Athanasius contra Gentiles 21:2, it's not right to give the signs greater honor than that which they signify. Now, Trinitarians, if we were to say, well, see, why are you giving greater honor to the Son as a sign or image or imprint of God, the seal of God, than God, the Father? Well, Trinitarians would say, well, we're not giving him greater honor. We're giving him equal honor. Yeah, but is that consistent with what he's saying here? He's kind of misrepresenting it to the Greeks the way I just did to you as a means of pointing this out. Right? Are the Greeks really saying that the idols, the signs, right? That's what the idols are have greater honor than that which they signify? The gods? I would say no, the Greeks don't say that, right? They say that, if anything, the most you could say is they say they're the same. Does anyone think the Greeks are saying that the idols are greater than the gods? That the signs are greater than that which they signify, and so that they're giving them greater honor because of that? I don't think so. Well, if anything, it's the same, and probably not that. So, Trinitarians, I think there's a problem here. And I think he's getting at the right thing, right? The imprint, right? The image, the seal. It's never as significant as the real thing. The real thing made the seal, imprinted the thing. Is the thing after which the image is made. This whole idea of an image is that it's something else, right? That something else is the most important. Jesus himself said that frequently, right? Father's greater than I. I'll tell you who to fear. There is one, right? And he knew it more than anyone. For neither if a man were to write the emperor's name would it be without risk to give the writing more honor than to the emperor. I'd say the same thing again. This whole more honor wouldn't really be consistent, right? Would they give the writing more honor? Maybe equal, right? Maybe they would honor the writing as equal as they would the emperor in his prayer. They'd bow to the writing. They'd offer it to the writing as a way to try to tell the emperor how much they love him. So either way, for neither if a man would write, okay. On the contrary, such a man incurs the penalty of death while the writing is fashioned by the skill of the writer. So also yourselves, had ye your reasoning power in full strength, would not reduce to matter so great a revelation of the Godhead. But neither would ye have given the image greater honor than to the man that carved it. Again, I don't quite follow. I don't think that's the point they're making, that it should be given greater honor. But if we take it as equal, or in any way equal or less, but as representative, then I think that argument would work against Trinitarians, right? I mean, he's basically saying, look, whatever's carved, whatever is imprinted, whatever the seal isn't as important as the seal maker. Right? The seal maker can keep making seals. For if there be any truth in the plea, as letters they indicate the manifestation of God, and are therefore as indication of God, worthy to be deified, yet far more than it would be right to deify the artist who carved and engraved them, as being far more powerful and divine than they, inasmuch as they were cut and fashioned according to his will. If then the letters are worthy of admiration, much more does the writer exceed them in wonder, by reason of his art and the skill of his mind. If then it be not fitting to think that they are gods for this reason, one must again interrogate them about the madness concerning the idols, demanding from them justification for their being in such a form. Catholics, Protestants, we demand justification for your idolatry. The Bible does not provide any direction for you to continue in this path, or to idolize Mary, or to do all these different things, the offerings, the prayers. Your own patriarch of faith is like just annihilating the use of idols. I mean, I don't think his arguments are entirely perfect, but he's going to town on all this stuff that's made by people, even as we saw in prior parts of the series, really blames the designers often because they're putting forth these things that then make people admire them overly. And so, yeah. We'll see if he gets to the point where he tries to make exceptions for Christian idolatry. But as we can see so far, and in dealing with the Greeks, he is definitely against the use of idols, especially for honoring them with honoring them or calling them God, right? Investing them with the honor and title of God. Section 22. The image cannot represent the true form of God, else God would be corruptible. For if the reason of their being thus fashioned is that the deity is of human form, why do they invest it also with the forms of irrational creatures? Or if the form of it is that of the latter, why do they embody it also with the images of rational creatures? In other words, why do they combine the two, rational and irrational, animal and human? Or if it be both at once and they conceive God to be of two combined, namely, that he has the forms of both rational and irrational, why do they separate what is joined together and separate the images of brutes and of men, instead of always carving it of both kinds, such as are the fictions in the myths? Scylla, Charybdis, my apologies, the hippocentaur, and the dog-headed Anubis of the Egyptians. For they ought either to represent them solely of two natures in this way, or if they have a single form, not to falsely represent them in the other as well. And again, if their forms are male, why do they also invest them with female shapes? Or if they are the latter, why do they also falsify their forms as though they were males? Or if again they are a mixture of both, they ought not to be divided, but both ought to be combined and follow the type of the so-called hermaphrodites, so that their superstition should furnish beholders with a spectacle not only of impiety and calumny, but of ridicule as well. Right, so there's a lot here about this whole difference in nature stuff. And a lot of this will come back in a different way later. But, he starts to say, look, why do you have these combinations? Why are you representing these different things as if you could have both in one form, like a centaur, half human, half horse, right? Why don't you just merge them together and create something new, like a combination of both, or keep them separate? And generally, if they conceive the deity to be corporeal, so that they contrive for it and represent belly and hands and feet, and neck also, and breast and other organs that go to make man, see to what impiety and godlessness their mind has come down, to have such ideas of the deity. For it follows that it must be capable of all other bodily casualties as well, of being cut and divided, and even of perishing altogether. Remember, he's arguing, look, all this is corruptible stuff. You're showing them with these things that don't make sense and that are corruptible, and so they can't be gods. But these and like things are not properties of God, but rather of earthly bodies. For while God is incorporeal and incorruptible and immortal, needing nothing for any purpose, these are both corruptible and are shapes of bodies, and need bodily ministrations, as we said before. For often we see images which have grown old renewed, and those which time or rain or some other of the animals of the earth have spoiled restored, in which connection one must condemn their folly in that they proclaim as gods things of which they themselves are the makers, and themselves ask salvation of objects which they themselves adorn with their art to preserve them from corruption, and beg that their own wants may be supplied by beings which they well know need attention from themselves to keep them, to maintain them. Like you see, like with all the statues and paintings in Egypt, all the what would have been really lifelike and beautiful in its prime, it doesn't hold that over time. And are not ashamed to call lords of heaven and all the earth creatures whom they shut up in small chambers. You know, a lot of this right here, when we talk to Trinitarians, and it takes a while after this, right, really into the 5th century before the whole Council of Chalcedon and duality of Christ natures and stuff gets further, articulated. But the way that Trinitarians talk, right? I mean, they talk like Jesus has his corrupting flesh, like exactly what he showed Thomas, right? Or when he showed the wounds, right? The open like holes in his hands and feet. That's corruptible. That's evidence of, because he raised up his body, right? He took it out of the tomb after he was raised the spirit, given a spirit body, went to the other spirits in heaven, Hades, after heaven. He was in heaven. Then he raised up his own body, so it was the same body, but he made it alive and also appeared in others. And according to 1 Corinthians 15, right, a lot of people criticize the Watchtower's description of the physical body basically just being Jesus' physical body being disintegrated into gases. I'm not going to speak for that in relation to his body prior to his ascension to the Father. And I believe it's also in some metaphysical way he disintegrated it to give it to the Father, right? Because 1 Corinthians 15 says that which is sowed a physical body is dissolved. When our physical body is dissolved, 1 Corinthians 15 or 2 Corinthians 5, I think it's 2 Corinthians 5, where it talks about the physical body, the tent we have, being dissolved. Okay, well, Trinitarians say that our physical body is resurrected and that Jesus has the same physical body in heaven, wound marks and all, right? In spite of the clear descriptions in areas like Revelation 1, 12 through 16, it's don't talk about anything physical or let alone with wounds, right? And it describes his whole appearance, exactly like the spirits in Daniel 10, who are also called like a son of man, just like Jesus is in Revelation 1. Like a son of man, Trinitarians, with arms, feet, and stuff. We're in their image, but not a man, a spirit. That's why he's described like a spirit, like other spirits. We're like sons of men, but not men. They're spirits. So we have this discussion here about corruption, incorruption. So at some point, if that pattern follows what Paul writes about the physical body being dissolved, well, that's consistent with what the Watchtower says ultimately happened to Jesus' physical body, and that happens to ours. We get a new body, a new spiritual body. We don't get the actual physical body that died. But when you talk to Trinitarians, because they misinterpret the account of Jesus' resurrection and ours, when they talk about it, it doesn't come out right. At least not that I can see, usually. And then they use that to defend the Trinity. They claim that because he's in this physical state, right? I mean, that's why he doesn't know all things. He has to be given a revelation even in heaven, right? Where he's not described as having flesh at all. Not normal flesh. It's not flesh. It's, like a son of man. So we can understand it, Trinitarians. But that wouldn't make sense. If his physicality is being given knowledge in heaven, Trinitarians, then he's corruptible. Because you can't, if he's being given divine knowledge, then his knowledge is not complete. It's not God's knowledge. Only beings that require God to live, which Jesus explicitly states he does, John 6:57, 5:26, 118. It's all over the place, right? He's the firstborn of God. So my point is, Jesus is not described, even when he's being given knowledge, as corruptible. But wouldn't that be, when he talks about bodily ministrations right here, images which have grown old, renewed, which time or rain or some other of the animals of earth have spoiled, restored. They need something to make them more. Right? And so he's contrasting that with God, who's incorporeal and incorruptible and immortal, needing nothing for any purpose. But that's not true of Jesus. He absolutely depends for everything on the Father. He depends for his life. He depends for his authority and position and throne. He depends on the Father for what he's supposed to do. What he knows. He says the Father tells him what to do. It's not his. Well, if it's not his, he doesn't know it. How could it not be his if he's God and he knows the same thing God the Father knows and they're equal from all eternity, and there's nothing that he needs for any purpose? If God says you need this, I would say you need it. If God says you need this divine revelation, Revelation 1:1, yeah, definitely need that. So what he's saying here, once again, everybody, is inconsistent with the Trinity when you consider it in light of his argument against the Greeks and how they end up arguing with us over the Trinity and Jesus' relationship with God. All right, let's do one quick check right here, right? Because we know things can go a little nuts. Let's see here. Okay. Nice to have you, 13 above. Looks like you're having a good conversation with everybody. So let's get back to it, right? We're reading Athanasius' work. This is our Read and Refute series, everybody. Sub-series of the Bible and the Trinity in conflict. It's something we're doing because while we are happy to continue to show that the Bible and the Trinity are in conflict with specific verses or subjects from the Bible, many Trinitarians today rely on later Trinitarian apologists or people who are consistent with Trinitarianism for many of their arguments. And they often claim that their association with these people in some way legitimizes the veracity of their theology. So we've decided that rather than continuously engage them, because some Trinitarians are not very pleasant, we're just going to undercut a lot of the things that we end up having to deal with that are just repeats, recyclings from these earlier Trinitarian apologists. And a lot of people don't know that outside of the Trinity stuff, people like Athanasius and others who taught things consistent with the Trinity had really strange views on many subjects, right? Not just personal opinions about things. I mean, statements of fact that are not true. We've documented to this point. And we're going to do one more to finish up this work against the Gentiles. We're on part 1.3 right now. We'll do part 1.4, finish up the work next weekend. So let's get back to our reading and continue with Athanasius against the Gentiles, section 23. The variety of idolatrous cults proves that they are false. But not only from these considerations may one appreciate their godlessness, but also from their discordant opinions about the idols themselves. For if they be gods according to their assertion and their speculations, to which of them is one to give allegiance? And which of them is one to judge to be higher, so as either to worship God with confidence, or as they say, to recognize the deity by them without ambiguity? For not the same beings are called gods among all. On the contrary, for every nation almost there is a separate god imagined. And there are cases of a single district and a single town being at internal discord about the superstition of their idols. The Phoenicians, for example, do not know those who are called gods among the Egyptians, nor do Egyptians worship the same idols as the Phoenicians have. Now, there are some differences, but a lot of these cultures and groups are, in fact, worshiping the same gods. They're just different names. He gets into that a little bit here, as you're going to see, and this ties in with what I was talking about earlier. It's part of why I kind of discussed it a little bit before we got going, because you're going to see right here, he kind of outlines what the Bible says is true. But he outlines all these things as if they're not really gods, when in fact, according to the Bible, many, if not all of these, that these different nations worshipped as gods, are really gods. They're just sons of God who have been appointed and are using these idols, some of whom may or may not be what they're actually using or represent them, but many of which may be. Like a lot of the ones that are consistent among these cultures and given new names, right? There seems to be a continuance of some of these gods in ways that would suggest they are actually, in fact, representations of those appointed sons. Or Satan, of course. And while the Scythians reject the gods of the Persians reject those of the Scythians. But the Pelasgians also repudiate the gods in Thrace, while the Thracians know not those of Thebes. The Indians, moreover, differ from the Arabs from the Ethiopians, and the Ethiopians from the Arabs and their idols. And the Syrians worship not the idols of the Cilicians, while the Cappadocian nation call gods beings different from these. And while the Bithynians have adopted others, the Armenians have imagined others again. And what need is there for me to multiply examples? The men on the continent worship other gods than the islanders, while these latter serve other gods than those of the mainlands. And in general, every city and village, not knowing the gods of its neighbors, prefers its own, and deems that these alone are gods. For concerning the abominations in Egypt, there is no need even to speak, as they are before the eyes of all. How the cities have religions which are opposite and incompatible, and neighbors always make a point of worshiping the opposite of those next to them. So much so that the crocodile, prayed to by some, is held in abomination by their neighbors, while the lion, worshipped as a god by others, their neighbors, so far from worshiping, slay if they find it, as a wild beast. And the fish consecrated by some is used as food in another place. And thus arise fights and riots, and frequent occasions of bloodshed, and every indulgence of the passions among them. And strange to say, according to the statement of historians, the very Pelasgians who learned from the Egyptians the names of the gods do not know the gods of Egypt, but worshipped others instead. Well, again, they may just be the same gods with different names. Now, maybe they changed some, and maybe they have different ones. But the Pelasgians learned from the Egyptians the names of the gods. So how could they not know the gods of Egypt? Right? They clearly know them. If by know he means worship, well, I'm not sure about that. It could be that they actually just have different names. And so, because they're clearly using the same concepts if they learned them from the Egyptians. And speaking generally, all the nations that are infatuated with idols have different opinions and religions. And consistency is not to be met with in any one case. And that's probably true. Nor is this surprising, although I think there's more than he's alluding to. And I think he does talk a little bit more about it. Or maybe that was kind of the part I was thinking of, where he He realized that some do, in fact, learn from others about these gods. But he still, again, says they're not the same. And I don't think that's necessarily true. And in many cases, is not true. For having fallen from the contemplation of the one God, they have come down to many and diverse objects, and having turned the word of the Father, Christ the Savior of all, they naturally have turned from that, turned from the word of the Father, have their understanding wandering in many directions. And just as men who have turned from the sun and are come into dark places go round by many pathless ways, and see not those who are present, while they imagine those to be there who are not, and see not. So they have turned from God, and those whose soul is darkened, have their mind in a roving state, and like men who are drunk and cannot see, imagine what is not true. See, again, he's really not allowing any existence to these gods, right? Not even on a demon level. Not even as like spirit sons of God, the way I'm talking about and the way the Bible talks about. Section 24, the so-called gods of one place are used as victims in another. There are several kind of smaller sections. We're going to go to 31, right? So at 24, we're getting close, and it'll go pretty quickly here, everyone. This, then, is no slight proof of their real godlessness, for the gods of every city and country being many and various, and the one destroying the god of the other, the whole of them are destroyed by all. For those who are considered gods by the some are offered as sacrifices and drink offerings to the so-called gods of others. And the victims of some are conversely the gods of others. So the Egyptians served the ox, the apis, a calf, and others sacrificed these animals to Zeus. For even if they do not sacrifice the very animals the others have consecrated, yet by sacrificing their fellows they seem to offer the same. The Libyans have for God a sheep, which they call Ammon, and in other nations this animal is slain as a victim to many gods. Right? So he's like, same God is worshipped in one case and sacrificed in another. The Indians worship Dionysus, using the name as a symbol for wine, and others pour out wine as an offering to the other gods. Others honor rivers and springs, and above all, the Egyptians pay a special honor to water, calling them gods. The Egyptians were known to have what is called, I believe, well, no, not necessarily. I think that's the Mayans, or was it the Aztecs? One of the South American cultures, I believe, had what were known as water sorcerers. And of course, we see a lot of the pyramids and things shared among these cultures, right? So it's very interesting how you get the Egyptians here. He's referring to them as calling the water, honoring the water as gods. And then this South American culture also having this special reverence for water. Others honor rivers and springs and above. Okay, we read that. And yet others, even the Egyptians who worship the waters, use them to wash off the dirt from others and from themselves, and ignominiously throw away what is used. It might have been the Egyptians who are known as water sorcerers. One of them are the Egyptians or one of the ancient South American cultures. We'll look that up another time, and you can do that on your own. Put it in the comments, or I will. In fact, because I hate to leave a point like that undone, let's just type it right now. Egyptians water sorcerers. Oh yeah, right. We of course we have the account in Pharaoh in the Bible of the turning of water into blood, right? So it could be considered. Is it the Egyptians who were called water sorcerers, though? There's a group. Might have been, again, the Aztecs. Just taking a brief break to kind of complement what we read in Athanasius about this honoring of water as gods by the Egyptians, and how there may be an either an ancient reference to complement that, or think it was a recent find. And so it would kind of complement this idea here. I'm not finding it. I know it's out there because I did read it. So let's get back to our reading, though. And it's just interesting to note that kind of either cross-culture or even among, if it's just Egyptians, where that reference is made, plus what we read here. This honoring of water as gods definitely happened. The item I'm referring to is a piece of archaeology that was recently found. And I'll try to mention it somewhere else to complement what I'm saying here or post it in the comments. But it was very interesting. While nearly the whole of the Egyptian system of idols consists of what are victims to the gods of other nations, so that they are scorned even by those others for deifying what are not gods, but both with others and even among themselves, propitiatory offerings and victims. 25. Human sacrifice, its absurdity, its prevalence, its calamitous results. But some have been led by this time to such a pitch of irreligion and folly as to slay and to offer and sacrifice to their false gods, even actual men, whose figures and forms the gods are. Nor do they see, wretched men, that the victims they are slain are the patterns of the gods they make and worship, and to whom they are offering the men. What they are offering, one may say, equals to equals, or rather the higher to the lower, for they are offering living creatures to dead, and rational beings to things without motion. For the Scythians, who are called Taurians, offer and sacrifice to their virgin. Right? See, Catholics right there. You got some Scythian in you right there. As they call her, survivors from wrecks such as Greeks as they catch, going thus far in impiety against men of their own race, and thus exposing the savagery of their gods, in that those whom Providence has rescued from danger and from the sea, they slay, almost fighting against Providence, right? He's saying the Scythians, right? They wait, they find shipwrecked people, and then they sacrifice them. So they're like taking people who quote unquote the gods saved and killing them. Like, so fighting against Providence is what he's saying there. Because they frustrate the kindness of Providence by their own brutal character. But others, when they are returned victorious from war, thereupon dividing their prisoners into hundreds, and taking a man from each, sacrifice to Ares, the man they have picked out from each hundred. Nor is it only Scythians who commit these abominations on account of the ferocity natural to them as barbarians. On the contrary, this deed is a special result of the wickedness connected with idols and false gods, where the Egyptians used formerly to offer victims of this kind to Hera, the Phoenicians and Cretans used to propitiate Kronos in their sacrifices of children, and even the ancient Romans used to worship Jupiter, Latarius, as he was called, with human sacrifices, and some in one way and some in another, but all without exception committed and incurred the pollution. They incurred it by the mere perpetration of the murderous deeds, while they polluted their own temples by filling them with the smoke of such sacrifices. This then was the ready source of numerous evils to mankind. For seeing that their false gods were pleased with these, they forthwith imitated their gods with like misdoings, thinking that the imitation of superior beings, as they considered them, was a credit to themselves. Hence mankind was thinned by murders of grown men and children, and by license of all kinds, for nearly every city is full of licentiousness of all kinds, the result of savage character of its gods. Nor is there one of sober life in the idols' temples, save only he whose licentiousness is witnessed to them by all. So he's basically saying only the idol would be an exception here, it seems like. Nor is there one of sober life in the idol's temple, save only he whose licentiousness is witnessed to them by all. Sounds like the gods there. There's a note. Among the licentious worshippers, the lifeless image is the only one free from vice. Right. Although the worshippers credit him with divine attributes, and therefore, according to their superstition, with a licentious life. 26. The moral corruptions of paganism, all admittedly originated with the gods. You pagans out there, pay close attention, okay? And that includes you Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, many Protestants. There's some paganism going on with all of you right there. And there's going to be some application here. Women, for example, used to sit out in the old days in the temples of Phoenicia, consecrated to the gods there by hire of their bodies, thinking they propitiated their goddess by fornication, and that they would procure her favor by this. While men, denying their nature and no longer wishing to be males, put on the guise of women, under the idea that they are thus gratifying and honoring the mother of their so-called gods. Right? So right there, we get homo. Right? Right? We got men denying their nature and they don't want to be men. So they pretend to be women right there. We get the trannies today. A lot of the homos they're very feminine. And then notice this homoism, or even trannyism, right? It's more tranny. Under the idea they are gratifying and honoring the mother of their so-called gods. Sam, that's you and the mother of God. No, I'm not saying you're putting on the guise of a woman right there, but you got this problem with effeminacy, and you are definitely referring to Mary as the mother of God, which the Bible never does, right? We've talked about everybody. It's not just Sam, right? Catholics, but Sam is like spreading this stuff everywhere. And here, like Sam likes to pretend he's not effeminate, right? Maybe that's why he does it. It's like he's trying to distract people. I don't know, Sam. We just know you're promoting Marvel Disney, a dramatically homo and tranny pro company, totally against hetero, effeminizing everybody, right? And you also pray to the mother of God, according to you. So we have it all right here, right? We got your Marvel Disney in the males not wanting to be males, and we have you praying to the mother of God. So you're really fitting in here with the Phoenicians, Catholics, and Sam right there. That's well, we've been talking about some of these things. It's not really a huge surprise, but we've got Athanasius. We're going to give him credit here, right? We give him credit for no homo. I think he's definitely on that side there. And he doesn't, we're going to find out about this we'll see what he has to say about Mary there, but so far here, him and Sam are not on the same page, right? For their women change the natural use into that which is against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust toward one another, men with men working unseemliness. Burned in their lust. Right, Sam, is this where you're getting this burning? Right, you say that frequently. You're like on air talking about God and your burning lust. And we're reading in Athanasius, but he's like saying, he's an ascetic, right? He's like totally against that kind of presentation and effeminacy. And now he's addressing this burning lust of Sam. But acting in this way and in like ways, they admit and prove that the life of their so-called gods was of the same kind. For from Zeus they have learned the corruption of youth and adultery, from Aphrodite fornication, from Rhea licentiousness, from Ares murders, and from other gods, other like things, which the laws punish and from which every sober man turns away. Does it then remain fit to consider them gods who do such things, instead of reckoning them for the licentiousness of their ways, more irrational than their brutes? Is it fit to consider them their worshippers human beings, instead of painting them as more irrational than the brutes, and more soulless than inanimate things? For had they considered the intellectual part of their soul, they would not have plunged headlong into these things, nor have denied the true God, the Father of Christ. He's definitely not presenting a Trinity to the Greeks, right? And he's not even trying. If he thought that was, he's kind of made some statements, and there's a little duality going on here, but so far, no Trinity. Not even in Athanasius, everybody, and of course, he doesn't get full Trinity out. We don't get full Trinity out of Athanasius. So it just took forever for them to figure out how they wanted to present this false doctrine. 27, the refutation of popular paganism being taken as conclusive. We come to the higher form of nature worship. How nature witnesses to God by the mutual dependence of her parts, which forbids us to think of any one of them as the supreme God. This shown at length. But perhaps those who have advanced beyond these things and who stand in awe of creation, being put to shame by these exposures of abominations, will join in repudiating what is readily condemned and refuted on all hands, but will think that they have a well-grounded and unanswerable opinion, namely, the worship of the universe and of the parts of the universe. For they will boast that they worship and serve not mere stocks and stones and forms of men, and irrational birds and creeping things and beasts, but the sun and moon and all the heavenly universe, and the earth again, and the entire realm of water. And they will say that none can show that these at any rate are not of divine nature, since it is evident to all that they lack neither life nor reason, but transcend even the nature of humankind, or mankind, inasmuch as the one inhabits the heavens, the other the earth. It is worthwhile then to look into and examine these points also, for here too our argument will find that its proof against them holds true. But before we look, or begin our demonstration, it suffices that creation almost raises its voice against them and points to God as its maker and artificer, who reigns over creation and over all things, even the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's who he points to and reveals as God to the Greeks, whom the would-be philosophers turn from to worship and deify the creation which proceeded from him, which yet itself worships and confesses the Lord whom they deny on its account. For if men are thus awestruck at the parts of creation and think that they are gods, they might well be rebuked by the mutual dependence of those parts, which moreover makes known and witness to the Father of the Word, who is the Lord and maker of these parts also, by the unbroken law of their obedience to him, as the divine law also says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. But the proof of all this is not obscure, but is clear enough in all conscience to those the eyes of whose understanding are wholly disabled. For if a man take the parts of creation separately and consider each by itself, as for example the sun by itself alone, and the moon apart, and again earth and air, and heat and cold, and the essence of wet and dry, separating them from their mutual conjunction, he will certainly find that not one is sufficient by itself, but all are in need of another's assistance, and subsist by their mutual help. The sun is carried along with and is contained in the whole heaven, and can never go beyond its own orbit, while the moon and other stars testify to the assistance given them by the sun. While the earth again evidently does not yield her crops without rains, which in their turn would not descend to earth without the assistance of the clouds, right? They all need to be present and acting together is what he's saying. So they can't individually be gods because they need each other. But not even would the clouds even ever appear of themselves and subsist without the air. And the air is warmed by the upper air, but illuminated and made bright by the sun, not by itself. And wells again and rivers will never exist without the earth. And the earth is not supported upon itself, but is sent upon the realm of the waters. While this is again is kept in its place, being bound fast at the center of the universe. Right, so we get some understanding here of Athanasius cosmology. Right, I don't want to read. This statement here: the earth is not supported upon itself, but is set upon the realm of the waters. While this again is kept in its place, being bound fast at the center of the universe. If he's saying here, obviously, that the earth is on top, is like supported by the realm of waters, obviously scientifically not true. No real evidence or reason why that should have occurred to him. And this whole being bound fast at the center of the universe is not true either, or at least not something we could know or prove, and not according to the Bible. And the sea and the great ocean that flows outside around the whole earth is moved and borne by winds wherever the force of the winds dashes it. And the winds in their turn originate not in themselves, but according to those who have written on the subject, in the air, from the burning heat and high temperature of the upper is compared with the lower air, and blow everywhere through the latter. For as to the four elements of which the nature of bodies is composed, heat that is, and cold, wet and dry, who is so perverted in his understanding so as not to know these things exist, indeed, in combination, but if separated and taken alone, they tend to destroy even one another, according to the prevailing power of the more abundant element. For heat is destroyed by cold if it is present in greater quantity, and cold again is put away by the power of heat, and what is dry again is moistened by wet, and the latter dried by the former. That's true, but it wouldn't necessarily hold for more permanent things, right? Like the sun, moon, stars, earth, things that aren't really evaporating or changing as much as hot and cold temperature or air or water. 28, neither can the cosmic organism be God, everything, all at once, right? The whole universe. So that would make God consist of dissimilar parts and subject him to possible dissolution. How then can these things be gods, seeing that they need one another's assistance? Or how is it proper to ask anything of them when they too ask for themselves one from another? For if it is an admitted truth about God that he stands in need of nothing, but is self-sufficient and self-contained, and that in him all things have their being, and that he ministers to all rather than they to him, how is it right to proclaim as gods the sun and moon and other parts of creation, which are no such kind, but which stand in need of one another's help? But perhaps, if divided and taken by themselves, our opponents will themselves admit that they are dependent, the demonstration being an ocular one. But they will combine all together as constituting a single body, and then will say the whole is God. For the whole once put together, they will no longer need external help, but the whole will be sufficient for itself and independent in all respects. So at least the would-be philosophers will tell us, only to be refuted here once more. Now, this argument, not one whit less than those previously dealt with, will demonstrate their impiety coupled with great ignorance. For if the combination of the parts makes up the whole, and the whole is combined out of the parts, then the whole consists of the parts, and each of them is a portion of the whole. But this is very far removed from the conception of God. For God is a whole and not a number of parts, and does not consist of diverse elements. I know some of you might be thinking, that sounds like a problem for the Trinity, right? And I think it kind of is. But let's see, we got to wait until he talks about it more, and we'll come back, right? We'll compare things like this and say, okay, is that consistent? Or did he change and contradict himself? But is himself the maker of the system of the universe? For see what impiety they utter against the deity when they say this. For if he consists of parts, certainly it will follow that he is unlike himself and made up of unlike parts. Right? And the Son, the Father, they're all unlike. They're all separate, distinct. They're just sharing the same nature. So they are unlike each other in ways. Or they'd be exactly the same, and there'd be no reason to call one the Father and one the Son. The whole idea of Father and Son requires a distinction based on an act. Either way, we'll remember this and come back to it if we find something later in the more theological discussions in the Bible. He is not earth, and if he is earth, he is not sea, and so on, taking the parts one by one may discover the absurdity of this theory of theirs. But the following point, drawn from observation of our human body, is enough to refute them. For just as the eye is not the sense of hearing, nor is the latter a hand, nor is the belly the breast, nor again the neck a foot, each of these has its own function, and a single body is composed of these distinct parts. Having its parts combined for use, but destined to be divided in course of time when nature, that brought them together, shall divide them at the will of God. Whoso ordered it thus, but may he that is above pardon the argument, if they combine the parts of creation to one body and proclaim it God, it follows firstly that he is unlike himself, as shown above, secondly, that he is destined to be divided again, in accordance with the natural tendency of the parts to separation. But, that wouldn't necessarily apply to God, right? He would be an exception to that because he's God. So he's comparing him with things that would tend to separate on their own if, in fact, they weren't God, which assumes they're not. Right? And I don't know that he really has the cosmological understanding to really argue this way. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying that, these arguments at times go beyond the evidence. Well, they definitely do. This is one of those. It's just not as offensive, right? Because we know more now, and so it makes more sense to us looking back on it. 29, the balance of powers in nature. 2 more, everyone. We'll stop after 30. Then we'll start at 31 and finish up next week. Balance of powers in nature shows that it is not God, either collectively or in its parts. We'll just do a quick check right there. You never know. Let's see. It looks like you guys might have been thinking about my question on the water sorcerers. Did you figure it out? Yeah, it is. It's Chichen Itza. I think that now that I remember that. It looks like 13 above and Flynn were coming. And then Betsy says she Googled it. The Maya peoples are ethno-linguistic. Okay. The name Chichen Itza means at the edge of the well of the Itzas, who are an ethnic group of Mayans known as the water sorcerers. That's right. The Itzas. That's what I remember. It's something I just read briefly, but it stuck with me. And then when I read that in Athanasius, I'm like, this Egyptian fascination with water and the Mayans, the Itzas, right, the water sorcerers. There's definitely something going on there. A lot of devotion, I doubt for no reason, but maybe just totally wasted and imaginations, like Athanasius would say. Or again, we could have demons and spirits that utilize these things in ways that convince people that are not, that are there to be utilized, that they're part of the seed of the serpent, right? They're part of those who are just going to follow in the ways of the serpent and not people that respond to God's call or from their own heart do the things that they're supposed to do. Let's get this finished up here, everyone. Thank you for joining me. We're almost done. And yet in another way, one may refute their godlessness by the light of truth. For if God is incorporeal and invisible and intangible by nature, how do they imagine God to be a body and worship with divine honor things which we both see with our eyes and touch with our hands? And again, if what is said of God hold true, namely that he is almighty, and that while nothing has power over him, he has power and rule over all, how can they who deify creation fail to see that it does not satisfy this definition of God? God hold true, namely he's almighty, that while nothing has power over him, he has power and ruler over all. Right? I mean, it totally does not fit with their ideas about the Bible. Everything he's saying here would contradict, I believe. He can explain all he wants, right? But what he's saying to them, if God's almighty, no one's over him. And yet, he would say Jesus and the Father are equal. And yet, clearly in the Bible, they're not. Even Paul, when he talks about the Son being basically appointed over everything, says it's obviously with the exception, right, of the one who put him there. There's just no way to get equality out of that kind of treatment or change in authority, and being the one exception being the God who puts Jesus there and not Jesus himself. And the Trinitarians say the very position he's being given is that of God, right? So what's being made God here? And they get into the whole duality problems again, but let's just focus right here and finish up. We'll get into that plenty more later. This whole discussion of almightiness and having power to rule over all, I don't see that as consistent with Trinitarianism, even though, again, it's here to the Greeks. When the sun is under the earth's shadow makes its light visible. Well, by day the sun hides the moon by the brilliancy of its light, and hail oftentimes injures the fruits of the earth. while fire is put out if an overflow of water takes place, and spring makes winter give place, while summer will not suffer spring to outlast its proper limits, and it in turn is forbidden by autumn to outstep its own season. If then they were gods, they ought to be defeated and obscured. They ought not to be defeated and obscured, by one another, but always to coexist and to discharge their respective functions simultaneously. Both by night and by day, the sun and the moon and the rest of the band of stars ought to shine equally together, and give their light to all, so that all things might be illuminated by them. I'm not so sure that's consistent with the Trinity either, but, we'll have plenty of time to come back and compare these things we read when they relate. So, again, I think there's something here, though, that, let me just put that. I'll bring these up later as they, again, apply, but I'll have it there for now. Spring and summer and autumn and winter ought not to go on without alteration and altogether. The sea ought to mingle with the springs and furnish their drink to a man in common. Calms and windly blasts ought to take place at the same time. Fire and water ought to furnish the same service to man, for no one would take any hurt from them if they were gods. As our opponents say, and do nothing for hurt, but rather all things for good. But if none of these things are possible, because of their mutual incompatibility, how does it remain possible to give these things mutually incompatible and at strife, and unable to combine, the name of gods, or to worship them with the honors due to God? How could things naturally discord and give peace to others for their prayers, and become to them authors of concord? It is not then likely that the sun or the moon, or any other part of creation, still less statues in stone, gold, and other material, or the Zeus, Apollo, and the rest, who are subject to the poet's fables, are true gods. This our argument has shown. But some of these are parts of creation, others have no life, others have been mere mortal men. Therefore, their worship and deification is no part of religion, but the bringing of godlessness and of all impiety, and a sign of a wide departure from the knowledge of the one true God, namely the Father of Christ. This is the third time he's explicitly identified the one true God as only the Father. I'm not saying that's how he always viewed it. This is what he's saying, okay? And on its face is correct. But we know there's more going on there, right? So he clearly does not believe, at least at this point, in these sons of God or spirit beings or even real demons, right? Because he refers to, not at least in terms of the nations and the things that they believe in, because he refers to them as either parts of creation, others having no life, and others mortal men. Right? So nothing here about the sons of God. Since then, this is thus proved. No, it wasn't, right? He assumed a lot of it. Certainly wasn't consistent with the Bible in many respects. And the idolatry of the Greeks is shown to be full of ungodliness, and that its introduction has not been for the good, but for the ruin of human life. And it's a consequence of our sin, right? Of the appointment of the sons of God because of what we chose and Satan's involvement. And so in one sense, it's actually authored by God. It's what he has set up and arranged for the continuation of our sinful world until things change. Come now, as our argument promised at the outset, let us, after having confuted error, travel the way of truth, behold the leader and artificer of the universe, the Word of the Father, in order that through him we may apprehend the Father, and that the Greeks may know how far they have separated themselves from the truth. All right. Our last section, everybody, and this is going to be part 2. We'll start with part 2, section 31 next week. It's beginning discussion of Athanasius' presentation on the soul and its rationality in comparison to other living things. Let's take a look. The tenets we have been speaking of have proved to be nothing more than a false guide for life, referring to the beliefs of the Greeks and their view of idols and gods. But the way of truth will aim at reaching the real and true God. But for its knowledge and accurate comprehension, there is need of none other save of ourselves. Neither is God himself is above all, is the road to him afar off or outside ourselves, but it is in us, and it is possible to find it from ourselves. In the first instance, as Moses also taught when he said, the word of faith is within thy heart. which very thing the Savior declared and confirmed when he said, "The kingdom of God is within you." For having in ourselves faith in the kingdom of God, we should be able to quickly see and perceive the King of the universe, the saving word of the Father. And let not the Greeks who worship idols make excuses, nor let anyone else simply deceive himself, professing to have no such road, and therefore finding a pretext for his godlessness. For we all have set foot upon it, and have it, even if we are not willing to travel by it, but rather to swerve from it and go wrong, because of the pleasures of life which attract them from without. And if one were to ask, what road is this? I say it is the soul. That's what he's been talking about. The soul of each one of us. And the intelligence which resides there. For by it alone can God be contemplated and perceived. Unless as they have denied, the impious men will repudiate having a soul, which is indeed more plausible than the rest of what they say, for it is unlike men possessed of an intellect to deny God, its maker and artificer. It is necessary, then, for the sake of the simple, to show briefly that each one of mankind has a soul, and that soul is rational, especially as certain of the sectaries deny this also, thinking that man is nothing more than the visible form of the body. This point once proved, they will be furnished in their own persons with a clearer proof against the idols. All right, so that's where we're going to leave it as we start to get into this discussion of the soul and rationality, and how he's going to use this also against the Greeks and against their use of idols and representation of animals and even things like the planets and universe and forces and features of nature. And so we're going to start right here, section 31, proof of the existence of the rational soul. I think he makes some good points here, actually. It's definitely a good reflection that's worth reading, and of course the rest of it. So we will look forward to that. And we will definitely conclude our read and refute of Athanasius against the Gentiles or heathen next week, part 1.4, after which we'll take a brief break, come back, get into our next work from Athanasius as we continue to discuss his works to see exactly what it is that he believed and why so many people today continue to believe the things that he taught, even though they're not clearly taught in the Bible. So it's important that we understand these things, and it's always good to meet together with you. So I thank you once more for joining me and sharing your time with me as we learn together more about these ancient Christian figures so that we can discuss their beliefs and their teachings with other people and better appreciate what the Bible has to say and what it teaches in comparison to people who lived much later, whether that's in Athanasius' day in the 4th century or today. We're interested in the Bible, and people who claim to believe in the Bible, who don't teach the Bible, we're going to read them and refute them if it's necessary for us to help other people and to convince them that the Bible and the Trinity are in conflict. So I look forward to seeing you all again for part 1.4. And until then, may God bless you in Jesus' name.